Oof. Have you ever seen a security report with 100,000 vulnerabilities? I have. And it's daunting, right? It's even paralyzing, but don't let it paralyze you. It's not uncommon for those of us in cybersecurity, and particularly those focused on vulnerability management, to see a lot more than these. And when we get done with our process here, believe it or not, we're going to boil that number all the way down to 38. Now that's more manageable, right? We know cyber tools bring us a lot of data and reveal vast quantities of potential vulnerabilities. It's great and all, but how do we take the next step to navigate all of these vulnerabilities and figure out where the risk lies? Are all alerts created equal? Most companies are very precise in their service level agreements and put a lot of time and energy into this part of the process for some reason. What does it get you? It gets you highly granular alert reports. It's a great first step, but it's also a double-edged sword, isn't it? Not every company spends the time necessary or has the resources to synthesize the many alerts received into a realistic action plan. What do you do with all of these alerts? People that are part of the vulnerability management program often wait in the line and say, what should I be working on? What's the first thing? If I'm doing my projects today, if I come in the morning at 9 o'clock and I start working on my list, where do I start? If I have 100,000 vulnerabilities or even 50,000, because they become critical, right? How do I synthesize this into a list that I can give to the people working in my organization? Think of your vulnerability management like a funnel. Those 100,000 alerts come through, but we have a variety of filters to apply to those alerts to assess which are the most immediate risks, the ones that we need to act upon with the most haste. Not all of our vulnerabilities require immediate attention, right? And some of them don't even have a solution. We must face the reality of finite resources and use our time efficiently. Let's look at an example with a couple of the most common filters that we use at DeepSeas. Within every organization, there should be a focus on the vulnerabilities that are most likely to be targeted, have the most potential negative impact, or the ones, frankly, the most likely to be exploited for money. This is often when I'm brought in to complete specific analysis for organizations who have trusted DeepSeas to transform their cyber defense programs. I'm going to cover a few of the key ingredients that I share with our clients right now. What does a solid vulnerability management program require, you ask? A strategy and process for vulnerability management and triage with a variety of filters to initially find the vulnerabilities that exist in the environment, rank those vulnerabilities, which means looking at them from the perspective of the threat actor, assigning the vulnerabilities to the right people and getting action started on each of these vulnerabilities and actually resolving them, ultimately fixing vulnerabilities. Hey, real quick sidebar. You remember that funnel I drew with all the CVEs in it? What does that mean? CVEs are simply a collection of vulnerabilities that the scanner is going to tell you about. These are managed by a government firm called MITRE, and they're simply there to tell us where we're at during the year and how many vulnerabilities that are out there. Every time a vulnerability comes out during a given year, they give it another number, so you can tell how many vulnerabilities are there based on the year. The other piece of it is the CVSS. All this is really is a format, it's a scoring system, and the security researcher will fill this out and apply it to the CVE. What we're tracking in our world is not so much the CVSS, but what the attackers are actually doing in the wild. So in order to look at the data this way, you're going to need to transform it a little bit before we get started. So just to make the funnel, right? You don't usually look at your vulnerability data this way. Usually it's a spreadsheet with a host and a whole bunch of findings under the host per host. And you might see the CVE listed for every single host, and this finding down here listed for every host. Instead of that, we need to transform the data a bit. And the way to do that is to tell the scanner to produce a vulnerability report. This report is going to change the way you look at the data. So you remember before how we had 100,000 vulnerabilities. Now, when we talk about criticality, let's say we go through the data and we say, which ones are the most important? Well, there's 30,000 of them that are facing the internet. I think those are pretty important. They have exposure. Maybe they represent our applications or servers. When I do this, I'm going to change the data again. And that's going to make it more like which systems within my environment should I focus on because of their vulnerability. So in that case, we might change it so that our finding count goes down to 1,600, something like this. This means that we would effectively have 1,600 unique vulnerabilities within our organization. Now we have a good place to start. Now we have something to do intel correlation against. How do we do that ourselves? It's actually a pretty basic concept. Imagine that all of the vulnerabilities that we're seeing from our threat intel feed, maybe it's just a list of CVEs. And it says these CVEs are being used, these vulnerabilities are being used by threat actors, right, in the wild. And we have R now that we created in the last step. We have our list of vulnerabilities, right? So you could say these are vulnerabilities known to be bad. And these are the vulnerabilities that we ourselves have. Us, bad, and then what's here. That is what we want to start on and work on first when we get into the office, right? Very first thing on Monday morning, we need this list. All of this is to come up with a list of what's next and how do you start. That's one of the hardest parts about vulnerability management is how do you start? Where do you start when you have this much data? You need to boil it all down. Using this process, you can start approaching this with the right amount of sanity and perform risk management within your organization. Now, we have some tools to help us with that. The Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA for short, produces a list of KEVs, or known exploitable vulnerabilities. This is a list that's created. It's known as the KEV, a lot of times, the first filter that we use. And it's a very simple one. And it's when the federal law enforcement agencies get involved in cybersecurity, they perform an investigation, and the person who's in charge of the investigation at the end fills out a form and says, was this known to be involved in the exploitation and compromise of a system? Was this known to support a threat actor in doing ransomware? This data is one of many sources available from proactive threat intelligence that we conduct on behalf of our clients at DeepSeas. So in this example, what we've essentially done, we've boiled it down to, again, 30,000 from the initial asset crunch, 30,000 systems that are external. Then we boiled that down to how many actual unique vulnerabilities do we have? We have 1,600. Now we've got this concept where we can take those 1,600 and compare them to the known exploited vulnerabilities list compiled by investigators every day. That takes us down, in many cases, to a number much more palatable. Let's call it 38. 38 vulnerabilities that we have within our environment that we can now focus on. Well, you know what that looks like? That looks like a couple months. That looks like a couple change windows. That looks like something that is achievable by our team, not something that is completely unrealistic. This is the work I do every day at DeepSeas with our clients. It's finding the needle in the critical vulnerability haystack, if you will. And that haystack is alert data. Many organizations try to do this on their own. That can be daunting, as you see. It's okay to get help. That's what our crew at DeepSeas is here for. Thank you for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe if you'd like any more tips on vulnerability management and transforming your cyber defense program.